My name is Seth Kastner, and this video is not about COVID vaccines, not really. I'm not an expert in vaccines or medicine or public health, but I have been thinking about vaccines a lot lately, especially since I'm about to become a father for the first time, which really seems to make me think a little bit differently about time as a concept. You know, already the pandemic, the height of all that, the vaccines getting rolled out, all that controversy, kind of seems like ancient history to me right now in some ways. And that distance, I think, actually is a pretty good reason why now is a good time to talk about not specifically the COVID vaccine. Like I said, this video isn't really about that. It's really about trust, and it's about planting seeds. And like I said, I'm not an expert in diseases or medicine, but I do think it would be good to hear from some folks who are. So I was actually surprised to find that the roots of vaccines go back as far as the 1400s, where there's documentation of smallpox inoculations in China. And then those practices spreading to places like India and parts of Africa, eventually finding its way to Europe and then across to here in North America. And vaccine technology has progressed a lot in that time. But in recent years, there's also been some major changes in the way that vaccines are viewed and the way that they're talked about.
The attitudes about vaccines have changed over time. There's always been vaccine hesitancy, but there's also been a shift in the trust that people have in science and in medicine. When the polio vaccine came out, people were dying to get it because polio was a significant problem, and people wanted their children to be vaccinated. When the DPT was or the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccine came into play, people really wanted their children to be vaccinated. They had seen the diseases. At this point, vaccines are almost victim of their own success because people don't see the diseases as much anymore. They don't see rampant infectious disease plowing through populations.
And again, this is not just about vaccines, and it's not about coronavirus. Controversy and mistrust around public health issues is something that's spread across history, and we often see things being repeated over and over again with different particulars in different times and situations.
The question is around human memory from catastrophic infectious events. Unfortunately, our memory is very short. And I think maybe with social media and the pace of the internet and the pace of all of our lives, it's even shorter. The 1918 Spanish influenza is also another example of where we all very quickly forgot kind of what took place. So if everybody remembers in 2020, 2021, where people were actually out protesting the use of masks, that exact thing happened in 1918, where there were anti-masking leagues. But one thing people don't realize is if you think about 2021 to 2022, we had this huge coronavirus pandemic, but majority of people were wearing masks. And we had literally zero influenza that year.
My introduction to vaccine hesitancy and the anti-vaccine movement was actually related to the fact that I've spent my career working in the world of autism and developmental disabilities. And for me personally, there's a really strong example of how a seed of misinformation can take root and can continue to cause negative effects decades upon decades later. The controversy around autism and the MMR vaccine specifically for measles, mumps, and rubella, it was a formative experience for me in how it illustrated the scientific method at work, albeit slowly. But for other people, a lot of other people, the controversy either reinforced or planted mistrust in those same systems of science and public health.
The MMR vaccine and its non-connection to autism is something that's been around for a really long time. Andrew Wakefield first published his fraudulent paper in the late 1990s, showing a connection to autism for folks who had the MMR vaccine. And this paper had fraudulent data and had no validity to it, but it was not disproven until over a decade later. So that's a decade span of time when this paper was published in a peer-reviewed paper, when folks panicked because it was published in a peer-reviewed paper written by a physician. And I think that really goes back to this trust component of how damaging it is when folks who are health professionals, over a decade of research and so much funding and so much time and so many lives lost, so many measles cases rose since that paper. It's, I think, one of the most harmful kind of public health circumstances that have happened.
Even if you weren't in the thick of the autism and MMR misinformation or the controversy around the HPV vaccine or pretty much any major vaccine rollout throughout history, the seeds that have been planted in the past by very vocal detractors of these vaccines, those have taken root in our society and to some degree in all of our minds. And many people who are skeptical and questioning regarding vaccines, very well-intentioned people. So whenever a new vaccine is developed, even one with potential to do great things around the world, it's faced with a lot of opposition from decades of negative framing, misinformation, growing distrust. And this distrust, it brings real and often dire consequences, not just kind of on a global scale in terms of public health, but for individual people and their families as well.
Before the pandemic, vaccine hesitancy was something that we all as physicians would encounter, and it was a problem, but it wasn't a major problem because many families still had a lot of trust in us and trust in the medical system. So now post-pandemic and with everything, with all of the misinformation that has kind of came out swirling around the COVID-19 vaccine, it does feel like we have a lot louder section of families, I would say, who are anti-vaccine. The truth of the numbers is there's a very small amount of people who are fully anti-vaccine and don't really want to have a conversation, don't really want to hear what we have to say. And there's a much larger group of people who are just vaccine hesitant, or people who might really just want to they have a few questions. They've heard a few things on the internet. And so it is imperative for us as physicians not to get a chip on our shoulder thinking that everyone is coming at us as anti-vaccine, because it's very easy with how loud that group has become on social media. And it's really important for us to really slow down and answer every question that any family might have, because the truth is, we are the experts about these things, and our families who are willing to listen to us and trust us need to hear that and need to hear the truth about the protection that vaccines offer to their children.
I'm a parent as well. And when it comes down to it in the doctor's office, someone is about to inject something into your child, you do have misgivings. And some of the negative buzz out there, even though I as a scientist and as a physician know that it's wrong, it passes through your brain. It's scary. This is your child. There is nothing more important than your child's health. Unfortunately, we don't have as much buzz out there about the positives of vaccines. That's not the way we work as a society, unfortunately.
As pediatricians, it's our job to know that if a family is coming to you with their newborn, potential newborn, they are going to be very, very, very cautious. And they may have, as you say, the planted seed of misinformation, but that is where we can start to plant our own seed of better informed. So it starts from there. It's challenging when we know from birth kids are given certain vaccines, and there's questions about that. So I do think it's also informing our families before they've had children, having information out there as to thoughts you may have as you're building your family and things like that.
So by starting to cultivate trust and understanding about vaccines and other public health issues, and by making proactive decisions now, we can help ensure that our immune systems, like individually and as a society, are stronger for when the next crisis arrives. The other big thing that I think starting conversations now can do is it can allow us to learn from our mistakes and our advances in the past to make sure that really everyone can benefit from our efforts. It's vitally important that we, as family members, as healthcare providers, as a society, ensure that accessibility and equity are at the forefront of our efforts to make a safer and more healthy future. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to ensuring positive health outcomes, but having conversations about our individual concerns and our individual needs can help, regardless of the challenges we have, personally or as a society.